Okay, so the things that you're going to need is a colour coordinated zip. So this one is orange, so because the bag's going to be black and orange, as we can see by the fabric I've chosen. Got Big Bang Theory and then an orange fabric. You also need some interfacing, which will iron on the back, and some general sewing supplies and a sewing machine and a book. Technically a book that the person that's going to be getting it is going to read. So then you know you're making it the right size. Right, let's get to some cutting out. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to have ironed all my fabric. I will iron it again in a minute. So then I don't actually have proper measurements. I measure it around the favoured book. So pop your favourite book or the favourite book of the recipient onto the fabric. And then I'm pulling it down just so that you can see that I'm giving it a good inch and a half from the edge. It's probably better to do more, not less. It will give you a seam allowance if you have a little bit of extra. If there is too much, we can cut it off later. So what I'm tending to do is I'm tending to cut it about an inch above the top of the book. And I've done that across the whole of the fat quarter. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it and then fold the fabric over the top. I'm moving the book over a little bit further now, but we've still got a seam allowance. So we loosely wrap it around the book, flip it over so you can see where it ends, and then you can then cut it again. As I say, leave more of a seam allowance rather than less. I've done this several times, so my seam allowance is not the biggest, but then it doesn't need to be. It's more about having room for a margin of error, because if this goes wrong, I've got no extra fabric, not of this Big Bang Theory one. It was very hard to get hold of, and I don't want to mess it up. So, because it's present. So now we have one big bit of fabric with a book in the middle. So we're going to take the book out in a minute, purely because we need this to be in two separate sections. So then what I'm then going to do is I'm then going to fold the fabric back in half. Then I'm going to use the scissors and cut down that fold, so I have literally a front and a back. It's a very odd angle, but you know, we can cope. Then you just cut it all along, and then you know you've got a front and a back. And I need to iron it again now. And I'll pop the book on top. You can see that the book is there with a very good seam allowance, but also it will create a little bit of give if you have a slightly fatter book. Because sometimes they do. Anywho, so we've now got our front and our back of our Big Bang. Now we're going to get the orange out, because this is going to be our inside fabric and also the fabric for the pocket. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a pocket on the front, and we're also going to have this on the inside, because you need to have a lining fabric. So what we're going to do is I'm going to lay out the Big Bang fabric squares, because we basically want the insides to be the same size as the outsides. So I'm laying my Big Bang fabric bits together, but you could have cut this out before you cut them in half. So what I'm going to do is I've placed them on there, and I'm just going to cut round them. It doesn't matter if it's not exact, because we can cut off any excess later, but make sure you've got more rather than less. So make sure there's none hanging off at any edge. And then we can cut that all the way to the end. And then we'll also cut this bit of the bottom off. But I'm going to gently turn it round, because it's easier to cut away from you. Well, it's safer to cut away from you than it is to cut towards you or around. So it's safer to be cutting off in that direction. So we'll cut a bit more off there. So then we have our two outside pieces. And then we are going to need to cut the orange one in half, so we get our two internal pieces. And this one now needs an iron as well. I ironed it when it arrived, and I've obviously folded it and put it in a drawer in the meantime. This time I am doing it across, because it's an easier way of folding it and then doing it, but I wouldn't encourage that. And mind your arms, hands, anything like that. And we'll pop the book back on there just on the safe side to make sure it still fits, and it still does. So we can take those two bits away now, and then we're going to be cutting out, we're going to need to be cutting out a bit for the pocket. The pocket is going to be orange. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use one of our fronts of our Big Bang Theory fronts. And then we're going to measure the pocket, because we're going to use the scrap that we cut off earlier to make the pocket. So that pocket's probably big enough. It's not, I don't know quite what we do with that pocket. I think I've put bits and bobs in there occasionally, but it's just nice to have that break up in the fabric. So what I've done is I'm going to use that whole bit, and then what I'll do is I'm just going to cut the excess off. We also need to make sure that we cut the selvage off. So the selvage usually has little holes in it, or it's where it gives you all the information about copyright. So the Big Bang one, it had copyright on the selvage. There's also be little dots on one side, but for this one, it's literally just the company name. So what we do is we cut that off, because it's not the strongest of bits of fabric. So you might find that if you sew through on it, you can just about see the dots above where it says Quilter's Shadow Style. So yeah, it's not the strongest part, so it may well fall apart if you use that bit. So at the moment we're not going to use that part. It's such a small part, we can take it off, and I don't want to find that when I give it to my friend that it all falls apart, because that wouldn't do at all. I've made several of these now, so for various different people. So now we are on to the interfacing. So what this is going to do is we're going to iron it on to the front and the back. So that's the Big Bang Theory parts. And what that's going to do is that's going to make it stronger. It's going to give it a bit of strength, because otherwise it's just going to be a bit floppy if it's just fabric. So it works as a backing strengthener. We're going to need it for the pocket as well. So we're cutting it around the pocket. For this, you're better off having it way bigger, because what we're going to do is we're going to quilt on the sewing machine, and as you quilt it will stretch out the fabric. So you need to have more interfacing, otherwise you might have a flimsy gap at one end, which is not good at all. So the best way to do this is for the Big Bang part, the front part, is to fold it in half and then just place it on top, and then cut out with a very, very good seam allowance, a very, very wide seam allowance. Cut round it, and then you'll get two bits that are exactly the same size, which is exactly what we wanted. Keep any scrap interfacing, because that's always useful for many manner of things. I've got a box of it, but I use it to back bookmarks and things like that. Right, so now we're going to do ironing. I don't have space for an ironing board, so I have an ironing mat, which I bought in Hobbycraft, and what I'll do is I'll use that to iron out the creases in all the bits of fabric, so all the fold lines are going to go, and then it's a case of ironing the interfacing onto the fronts and backs of the fabric. So we need to make sure we iron all the bits, because even if you have any kind of fold line when you start quilting, it will show. The whole thing about quilting is that it's the time and the beauty that's taken into ironing at every separate stage. I hate ironing, but I love quilting. I literally had an iron to quilt. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do with the pocket is we're going to put it on the interfacing. So there'll be a bobbly side, and that is the glue. That glue is heat activated. So you'll find that as I hold the iron on it, it's starting to melt the glue underneath. It's very difficult. Try not to do it. Try not to get the iron on the glue. Otherwise you'll get a little bit of glue on your iron. There are ways of getting rid of that, but you don't want to transfer the glue onto any of your other fabric, because that's just water, but it will literally won't come off. It's crazy, but you'll see now that that's literally stuck to it. But you can only stick to interfacing one side, so the other side of the pocket is going to have to be done. I'm going to have to do that with pins. So this is one of the inside bits, and although the inside bit you're not going to be able to see and you're not going to quilt it, do iron the fabric and get the kinks out of it first. I mean, you know, particularly if you're making it for somebody else, it's supposed to look beautiful, it's supposed to look lovely, and you want it to look its best. And the one way of making it look its best is get all the creases out of it before you start sewing. You probably find we'll end up ironing it again at the other end when we finish sewing it, but at the moment we just want to make sure it's as flat and as beautiful as it can be. What I'll do is I'm going to speed this bit up because if you don't know how to iron, I've probably taught you more than enough about ironing, because I know very little and we don't need to see all of that. Right, let's take all this back to the sewing machine and get sewing. Right, here goes. The camera may shake. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our Big Bang Theory and we're going to do crisscross lines across the Big Bang Theory fabric and the interfacing. And then literally we will just do lines in a diagonal motion, and we will cut it off at every time and then reconnect it every time. And we'll do the lines diagonally one way and then diagonally the other way. So you might not just about be able to see it, but if I turn it over you can see where we've done all the diagonal lines across the Big Bang Theory fabric. We also need to do exactly the same to the back fabric, and then we can start putting the zip on. So I bought a zip from Hobbycraft, but it's very important that your zip is longer than the top of your bag. I mean, it's easier to cut things off, we can't add. So we need to put it somewhere in the middle, but we need to put it zip facing down. So the metal bit of the zip needs to face the right side, which is the Big Bang side. And then we need to put the backing fabric face down as well. So that means that if you flipped it over, you'd have two wrong sides, and then you've got two right sides sandwiched together, which is the orange and the Big Bang. So then what you need to do is put your zip somewhere in the middle, just so you've got a little bit of extra on both sides. And then you just need to pin those into place. But it's very important that everything lines up. So you line up, but front, zip, yeah, lining. That's the word I'm talking, lining. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my pins in the downwards direction, because when I send them through the sewing machine, we have to take them out as we go, and it's easier to pull them out if you can pull them out of the direction. So either left or right, pull them out rather than to pull them up and down to get them out. So we never do them in the direction of the fabric. It's always better to put more pins in than less, because you want to make sure that when you sew it that you grab all the layers. And it will take this to the sewing machine, and we will sew through all layers. So we're cutting out the edges of the pocket, and then we're going to attach a zip to the pocket. So for this pocket we have a black zip. So we put it face up. So the front part of the pocket that we've done the quilting on goes face up. The zip goes face down, and then the lining fabric goes face down. Very similar to the way that you did the other one. So then we're going to pin those, and then we're going to take both to the sewing machine, because we may as well do the two at the same time. Okay, so now we've done that, we should have two bits and a zip in the middle. So now we're going to put them the right way out, so then you can see the zip. I'm going to get the book out again, just going to make sure it definitely fits. It still does. Quite a lot of space around it as well. We're winning. Okay, so we're going to pin the pocket and do the top side of the black zip first. So because there's no raw edges to this one, we can literally just do a layer of what they would call top stitching as close to the edge of the zip as possible, because it just neatens it up if you top stitch it. So we'll take that over to the sewing machine in but a moment, but we may as well cut out the back fabric as well, so we can cut off all the excess interfacing and get rid of it, because it's done its bit now. And then we'll be attaching those bits to the orange zip. Okay, so for this one, we'll have the zip facing up, because we'll have the big bang bit towards us, and then big bang facing down, and then the lining fabric will face the lining fabric. So you have the two right sides of the lining fabric together, and then the two sides of the big bang fabric together, and then you pin the 3 layers together, lining the zip up with the edge of the fabric and the edges of the fabric, so you've got the same amount of zip, extra zip on each side. So if we pin that all together, and then we'll sew that on first and then sew the top of the front pocket, and then it will be a case of just constructing the bag. It doesn't matter at this point if it doesn't perfectly line up, because we'll sew it and then we can cut any excess edges off. And then we're going to take that over to our sewing machine. Okay, so now we have got 2 parts of the big bang attached to the 2 sides of the zip, and we have 1 side of the black zip attached to the front and 1 attached to the pocket. So now we need to split it so that you get the 2 lining sides together and the 2 front sides together, because we're going to pin it all the way around, leaving a gap to pull it through, and then we'll be sewing all the way around this time. So this will make the actual bag. We need to move the zips in slightly, because we don't want to sew them on the outside. We want to make sure that they are on the inside where the zip's going to be, otherwise we'll be cutting the zip off at the other end, and that's no good. You need to try and fold the zip so that it kind of sits, but it doesn't necessarily always sit. As long as it's all sitting in the same direction, that's all that matters. And then I tend to pin the zip first, because then I can smooth it out from the zip to the edges, because that's the bulky part. And this time I'm putting the pins in the other way around, just around the zip, because you need to have a lot of grip for the zip, because zips can be quite temperamental. And then what we then need to do is just keep pinning all the way around, so all the way around the 2 big bang, and then all the way around the 2 bits of lining fabric. But when we get to the lining fabric, we're going to leave a gap, because you'll need to be able to pull it through. Yeah, make sure you've got all the layers and all the layers are sitting flat. we need to leave a gap of at least a couple of inches, because that means you can then pull it out through there and then sew up the hole. And then once you've pinned it all, you can take it to your sewing machine. Okay, so we've now sewn it all the way around, except for the hole. So now I'm going to show you what the hole is for. So the hole is so we can pull it all through. We're just going to test to make sure before we chop anything off that it fits exactly how we want it to. So it will be a bit bulky, but it's best just to put it all through and just double check that there's nothing wrong with it before you start chopping off any excess. Because as I said before, you can chop it off, but you can't put it back. So this is quite fiddly because it's a little bit, because there's lots of bits of zip and bits of pocket everywhere that's all excess. But we'll get there in the end. And then it's just a case of poking out all the corners, you know, just making it look pretty. That's what we're here for. That's what it's all about. You should have all the zips should be on the outside, so you can unzip pockets, you can unzip the bag. It's just a case of just making sure that everything's exactly where it should be. Which on this one it looks like it is. So that's a bonus. And we've tested it and the book still fits. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put it back out the wrong way again. Because now we can go through and we can cut off the excess. So we're going to pull it all out and then we can cut off all the excess bits of zip and excess bits of fabric that we haven't used. So for us that's mainly the pocket, because I always make the pocket too big. And we cut the bits of zip off as well, because, you know, we don't need those anymore. They're done. They've served their purpose. Okay, then we go back to putting it all back through again, but this will be the last time we do that. You'll find it'll be slightly easier this time because there won't be all the extra bulky bits of zip to mess about with. But it's sometimes good to unzip the pocket, you know, get all the edges looking just about right. And then we can also sew up the bottom edge. So if you just take it over to the sewing machine and sew it on the bottom edge. And then last but not least, does the book still fit? Oh, it does. There we go. The book still fits. And then it's zipped up and it's all